Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, reaction from the McCain Institute on U.S. efforts to negotiate a peace settlement between Ukraine and Russia. Also tonight, new research identifies gut bacteria that likely causes multiple sclerosis. And we'll hear about efforts to conserve water through algae. Those stories and more next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your public television station.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. Arizona's election chief, Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, is not impressed by President Trump's plans to somehow ban mail-in ballots. In a statement, Fontes says that he'll tell the president to, quote, pound sand, and ask State Attorney General Chris Mays to challenge any executive order on the issue. Fontes followed that with an appearance on CNN.
I don't know where the president is getting his advice from. It's clearly not from an understanding of the Constitution. But the clear message needs to be this. I don't work for you, Donald Trump. I work for the people of the state of Arizona. And I don't take my guidance from you. I take it from the Constitution and from the rules established in state law. That's where we operate, and that's where we will continue to operate in spite of Mr. Trump's delusions.
The president yesterday said that an executive order on banning mail-in voting is being drafted and stated that he has the authority to tell state officials how to run elections. Again, Fontes disagrees.
Look, if he wants to propose changes through the regular congressional process, he has the right to do that. He's, the president, he's a citizen like anybody else. And the Constitution is very clear about that. But there's no reason why anybody should think that it's A, reasonable or B, rational to be just coming out as the president saying, I'm going to run the show and you work for me. Like I said, I don't work for the president. I work for the people of the great state of Arizona.
Other headlines: an opinion released by Attorney General Chris Mays states that election officials should not change the status of 200,000 voters impacted by an MVD error that falsely confirmed that the voters provided proof of citizenship. Now, the AG's opinion offers guidance on how to proceed with registration status of these voters, but it's not the law, and Maricopa County Recorder Justin Heap has already notified 83,000 of the voters that they need to show proof of citizenship within 90 days or they'll be reclassified and allowed to vote only in next year's federal elections and not statewide races. Speaking of statewide races, Governor Katie Hobbs has filed for re-election. The governor has made no secret of her plans to run for a second term. Filing of paperwork makes it official. Hobbs not expected to face any Democratic challengers. As for the Republican side, Congressman Andy Biggs and businesswoman Karen Taylor Robeson have all announced their candidacies already, and they are campaigning, and there might soon be one more Republican in the governor's race. Reports are that Congressman David Schweikert is considering a run for governor. Schweikert is expected to make a decision by the end of the month. If Schweikert enters the race, it would make for a considerable change in the dynamics of the GOP primary and possibly the general election as well. It would also significantly alter the race for Congress in Arizona's 1st congressional district, where Schweikert is the incumbent. A number of Democrats are already campaigning for the seat, which is considered a prime target for Democrats, even if Schweikert decides to run for re-election. President Trump's recent meetings with Russian President Vladimir Putin and then days later with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky alongside a delegation of European leaders have made headlines, but the war in Ukraine continues, with Russia unleashing an especially heavy overnight strike. What was really accomplished with all these meetings, and where does the war go from here? Joining us now from Washington is Dr. Evelyn Farkas. She's director of the McCain Institute. Always a pleasure, Evelyn. Good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. Your thoughts on what happened yesterday, because it seemed like a lot was happening, but what really happened?
Yeah, good to see you, Ted. Unfortunately, there was a lot of drama. It was interesting to see all of these world leaders around President Trump and, of course, rallying around President Zelensky. But I'm afraid that there was not much tangible progress that was made. President Trump came out of the meeting saying that President Zelensky and President Putin would meet. I think that's highly unlikely. So it remains to be seen whether there was some understandings gained behind the scenes on security agreements, but again, I'm cautiously pessimistic.
Yeah, I want to get to those security agreements, the possibility of those agreements in a second here. But the impact of having so many European leaders, heads of state, they are in Washington around a table with Zelensky, with President Trump. It looked impressive. Did much come out of it?
So, and it was impressive because it showed a level of unity that we haven't seen in Europe, frankly. Even when it comes to Russia's aggression, this kind of level of unity where they would drop everything, in the middle of, I know that Prime Minister Starmer was on vacation and he interrupted his vacation to come over here to make sure that President Trump understood the position of the Europeans and supported the best possible position for Ukraine. So I think in that it was meaningful, and President Trump was gracious and received them warmly. And so the optics were good. But in terms of outcome, that really remains to be seen. I was glad they talked about security guarantees, but my fear, Ted, is that there's a lot of daylight between them in terms of what security guarantee means.
Well, and I think President Trump told Fox News today, it does not mean U.S. boots on the ground over there. And if that's not what it means, the president has threatened sanctions in 2 weeks. That came and went. He says especially difficult reaction if they keep doing this, that, and the other. They're still doing this, that, and the other, Russia is. Nothing seems to have happened on the Russian side, but we're hearing, Evelyn, that he likes the idea of Ukraine surrendering land for peace. What do you make of that?
Right. I think that it is something that Ukraine might consider, but Ukraine would only consider surrendering land for peace if it's a durable, lasting peace. And that's where these security guarantees come into play. Having U.S. troops on the ground actually isn't enough either. It's really what the Ukrainians need is a guarantee that if they are attacked again by Russia, that the United States will come to their military assistance. And in order to believe that kind of guarantee, actually, it has to be ratified by Congress, I think, at this point. It can't come just from any U.S. president. I think the Ukrainians will want it to be like a NATO, what we call Article 5, an attack against one is an attack against all. Article 5 in the treaty that created NATO says that. That kind of agreement could be ratified bilaterally, so we have that same commitment to Japan and Korea. We could get that through Congress, and that would mean something. But short of that, it gets more risky for the Ukrainians.
And it sounds like the president, again, earlier he wanted a ceasefire. Now he's saying he does not want a ceasefire. He wants a peace agreement, and that a ceasefire would be the lesser. And so forget that. Peace agreement or nothing. Ceasefire is awfully important, Evelyn. You mentioned Korea. There's still a ceasefire in Korea. They never had a peace settlement.
Correct. Well, I think what happened was President Trump went into the meeting. Well, first of all, as you mentioned, President Trump put pressure on Vladimir Putin. He said, I'm going to slap sanctions on countries that are buying oil and gas from you. And he actually did increase tariffs on India as a punishment. In response, but he was going to put more sanctions on, more tariffs on. In response, President Putin said, no, I'll meet with you. So they met. Well, going into the meeting, President Trump said, I must have a ceasefire coming out of this meeting. And as you point out, he's now dropped the requirement for a ceasefire. That happened after he met with President Putin. And that is, concerning because the Europeans and the Ukrainians saw it as something that would be kind of the minimum that Russia could do to show that they might be willing to negotiate in good faith. It would only be a first step because, frankly, Vladimir Putin's broken a lot of ceasefires, but it could provide some relief. So I think the Europeans are distressed that President Trump has come off of that requirement.
Yeah, and a peace agreement, correct me if I'm wrong, these things take a long time to develop and a long time to get done. Putin and Trump could both be history by then.
Right. Even when you have a ceasefire. So let's take the example of Armenia and Azerbaijan. President Trump is saying he brought an end to that war. Actually, the war was brought to an end under the Biden administration. But they still don't have a peace agreement because they still have yet to, as you said, settle on all of those details. But the important thing is that the guns are silenced and they're not combating one another.
Yeah, so what do we take of all this? And before we get that last question, I got to ask you, when you saw Vladimir Putin stepping foot on a red carpet on American soil in Alaska, what did you make of that? What were your thoughts? What did you feel?
I felt distressed because it was showing weakness on the part of the United States. Here we were letting a war criminal come onto our territory to have this high level meeting, the highest level that you could have with our president. If anything, he should have been escorted, from his plane into an airplane hangar, a sparse hangar on the military base. He did not deserve red carpet treatment. There are people who have been raped, murdered, and kidnapped, including children, because of his decisions, because of his decision to launch this war. So it was regrettable. And also it made us look weak because we have the upper hand. Yet President Trump gave him the upper hand even in the press conference when he let him speak first.
Yeah, yeah. Last question here. It's a weird question, but it sounds like President Trump is just really, really wanting a Nobel Peace Prize. And that could very well be behind much of what we're seeing and hearing here. What are your thoughts on that? And, I mean, is there an end justifying the means here? If you give him a prize and you get peace, is it worth it?
Well, it all depends what kind of peace, right? I mean, you don't want to have a peace that doesn't last, so it's a shaky peace. That's not helpful to anyone because again, it's not just about stopping Putin's aggression against Ukraine. It's about stopping Putin's aggression against other European countries. Don't forget he's occupied Georgia as well, 20% of that country. It's about protecting our NATO allies. It's about making sure that China sees that you can't get away with seizing your neighbor's territory so it doesn't make a move against Taiwan, right? It's about making sure that the international order stands up, that borders matter, and you can't alter them using force. Otherwise, we're back to a world that's far more dangerous. So the peace that we get is important. It's not any old peace. Yes, if President Trump can get a durable, lasting, just peace for the Ukrainians, and sure, they'll have to give up something. If he can get something that will last, that will be just from the perspective of the Ukrainian people, that would mean that he was worthy of the Nobel Prize. But unfortunately, today, I don't feel like we're close to that place right now.
Dr. Evelyn Farkas, again, McCain Institute Director. Always great information, always great to speak with you. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ted. Take care.
Arizona PBS wants to wish a very happy birthday to our Arizona PBS Kids Club members that are having a birthday. Thanks so much for being a part of the Arizona PBS Kids Club. And if you'd like to see your name here during your birthday month, get a grown-up's help to visit azpbs.org/family to learn about our Arizona PBS family membership. So happy birthday from all of us at Arizona PBS.
Justice never sleeps. I don't think this was an accident.
Precisely.
We're good.
And all of this is being done in secret.
A project of secret keeping.
There's a connection here. We'll find out what it is. Is it murder? We need to start investigating.
You could start there. We have a match. Time is, as they say, of the essence.
Scientists think that they've found two key bacteria that cause multiple sclerosis. The findings come from a study that focused on twins, where one sibling has the disease and the other doesn't. And to learn more, we welcome Dr. Barry Hendon. He's a neurologist at Banner University Medical Center, Phoenix. Doctor, good to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're talking multiple sclerosis here. Let's set the definition. What is multiple sclerosis?
We define multiple sclerosis as an immune-mediated disorder. That means it involves the immune system. in which the immune system is misprogrammed so that, as opposed to going after the pathogens it ought to, bacteria and viruses, it misinterprets and goes after the myelin of the central nervous system. That means the optic nerve, the brain, and the spinal cord.
Wow, what makes it go the wrong direction?
That's still a mystery. We're getting closer and closer, but the answer would be that it's a combination of genetic susceptibilities involving multiple genes and also triggers that act on those susceptible people.
And we have you here because there might be a connection, or perhaps there is a connection, to gut bacteria. Talk to us about that.
So this is another trigger. You mentioned the study of twins. It was a really elegant German study in which they looked at 8 sets of twins and found that if they took the microbiome, the microbes from the intestine of the twins with MS, and injected those into mice, particularly vulnerable mice, that 6 out of 8 developed a picture, the mice, that would be consistent with an MS-like picture.
Wow.
But that if they took the same microbes from the intestines of the pairs that did not have MS, they did not. The mice did not develop MS. So this really indicated something we've known for a while, and that is the microbiome, particularly in the gut, can either produce a more inflammatory or a more quieting effect on the immune system.
So, and again, these bacteria, they're found in what I understand is an area where there's a lot of these pro-inflammatory T cells and other things going on. That's kind of a hint that they're not such good to have around.
That's right. So the microbiome of the gut is our friend and our enemy simultaneously. When it behaves, it's our friend, and it talks to the immune system in a way that is productive for both the microbes and for the immune system. But sometimes it misbehaves and creates a more inflammatory response, and that's when it causes probably a worsening of disease.
Okay, but do we know, could it be food? Could it be external factors, exposure? What makes this stuff misbehave?
All the above. So we know that there are multiple triggers, that in the vulnerable population there are multiple triggers. Lack of sunlight, lack of vitamin D, maybe childhood obesity, and most importantly on the infectious side, the EB virus, the virus that causes mononucleosis. But this discussion is about the human microbiome, and there it looks like there are inflammatory components, and there are things that we do that increase that and things that we do that decrease that. For example, how we eat, what our lifestyle is, all those things can change whether we create a more inflammatory or less inflammatory.
How do we eat to create a less inflammatory? I can figure out how to make a more one. I got a pretty good idea on that one. But how do you cut it down?
So the idea is that maybe if we ate more natural foods, less processed foods, with more fiber, that we would be doing something that would create a more friendly environment in the gut. And I think a part of wellness is doing the same. Are we exercising? Have we stopped smoking? Have we kept our alcohol modest in intake? So how we eat, how we exercise, how we live in our lifestyle all create changes in that microbiome.
But you can do all that, and that stuff could still be there, and that stuff will get out and do some damage.
That's exactly right. It's all about susceptibility. So I don't think you can create a perfect environment in which it's impossible to get MS, nor an environment in which you must get MS. But you can change the odds.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we try to do as clinicians, change the odds.
Real quickly, last question. Can this be applied to other conditions?
This can be applied to multiple other conditions, including many of the autoimmune or immune-mediated disorders.
Interesting. Good stuff. Dr. Barry Hendon again, Banner University Medical Center, Phoenix. Encouraging news and good to hear. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
I'm Amna Nawaz. Tonight on the NewsHour, the assurances Ukraine is seeking before agreeing to any kind of peace deal. That's coming up at 6 on Arizona PBS.
A Phoenix-based soil health company has teamed up with ASU to show how Arizona farmers can conserve water through algae. Kathleen Merrigan is the executive director at ASU Sweetie Center for Sustainable Food Systems. Good to have you here. We used to do a lot of algae stories, it seems like 10, 15 years ago, and then it kind of eased off a little bit. Is algae still a thing?
It's still a thing, a great thing, actually.
Really?
Great to be here. Let's talk.
Let's talk. All right, let's talk about improving soils with algae.
Yeah. So what this company does, that's Phoenix-based, it's called Myland, one word. They extract live native microalgae from a farmer's field, and then they take a close look at it and they figure out what the best strains are. They boost it in a proprietary way, but sort of fermentation, and then they pump it back through the irrigation system that the farmer already has in place to enhance soil quality.
How does it enhance soil quality?
So algae is a biostimulant. There are a lot of biostimulants out there, and farmers are understandably wary because they're all promoted. You know, this is the greatest thing since the beginning of time. And so I actually came across this company when I was working for a venture capital firm based in Europe. And I thought it was very exciting, but the partners at the firm were somewhat skeptical because there was not enough third-party data to support the company's claims. So that was the genesis of this ASU partnership with Myland.
Okay, so we're talking better water efficiency, we're talking better water conservation, we're talking the whole 9 yards here.
Well, microalgae, live microalgae, as Myland puts it into a farmer's system, can do a lot of things, including increasing water holding capacity. And in our very thirsty state, that's very important. But also it will enhance the soil quality generally. But what ASU's project is all about is using state-of-the-art technology to measure the impact on the farmer's water use.
So, and by doing so, you're measuring the impact on the crops themselves, how much they hold. You can do that, how much they additionally hold water now with algae?
What's being held in the soil.
Okay.
So what we do is we go to a farm, and we have several farm sites throughout the state where farmers agree to let us do an experiment there. So we have a control plot and the plot where we're using the Myland solution, and we're collecting real data, a lot of data over time throughout the crops, and a lot of different crops too.
So how is it installed? I mean, do you install it like fertilizer? Do you put it underneath? Is it pumped through? How does it work?
It's great because for the farmer, it's easy peasy. You do have a Myland tank operation that's set up on your farm, but it blends right in with your existing irrigation system. So it's quite easy, actually.
Yeah, and it does make a difference. Again, how much of a difference? Let's say I'm using X amount of water right now. I get Myland, I get all this algae in there. How much am I going to save? X minus what?
Well, that's the question that ASU is working on. So my center, along with the ASU Center for Hydrologic Innovations, is doing measurements on the water with these things called eddy covariance towers, state-of-the-art equipment. And in another few months, we'll have the first reams of data. But Myland does have data on their website that makes claims, but before I speak from the ASU, I'm going to make sure it's all certified, stamped with approval and all of that.
Yeah, you bet. All right, is this the kind of thing that is viable to be mass produced? I mean, in other words, can we see the San Joaquin Valley and all of the Midwest with these towers and with this algae being pumped into the ground, or is this kind of a specialized boutique kind of a thing?
It's actually being used in several states now, and I have a bunch of my graduate students this summer. We've been looking at the U.S. Department of Agriculture's EQIP program, Environmental Quality Incentive Program, which helps farmers cost-share innovations on their farm that are conservation focused, so saving water, improving soil quality, that potentially could qualify for EQIP. And if it does, then farmers might get as much as 50 to 90% cost share when they implement the technology. So that's a part of our project too.
Last question before you go, real quickly. The quality of the crop, is it as good as it is before? I guess more algae shouldn't make that much difference, should it?
More algae should make a better crop.
It should make a better crop. Better tasting, taller, stronger?
Well, taste is a little subjective, but certainly it will contribute hopefully to yields, but certainly in terms of the resilience in these harsh climates that we face in our climate-stressed world.
Yeah, well, it's very encouraging. Kathleen Merrigan, again, the Sweetie Center for Sustainable Food System. This sounds like a sustainable food system, and then some. Thanks for sharing. We appreciate the information.
Thanks for having me.
And that is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening.